Hello, everyone. My name is Marina Walker. I work at the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. It's my first time in Jordan. It's my first time at ARIJ. And today, 12 years ago, I was a mom for the first time. So it's my son's birthday, Santiago. So lots of things to be excited about and to celebrate for me today. And thank you so much for coming to this session. I hope that when you get out of this session, all this hype that is around AI has gone away, and we can find, and we would have found together ways in which artificial intelligence can actually make the work of investigative journalists. We can understand the ways in which it can help us do a better job. It can save us time. It can do tasks, those kind of like painstaking tasks that take us so much time and free us to do what we do best, which is contextualize, empathize, and tell stories. So that's the promise of artificial intelligence for journalism. It's not going to replace us, so that's the first thing. Let's all be happy about it. I think it would be impossible to replace the work of an investigative reporter because so much is in the judgment. And computers are often not very good on judgment, are often not very good on context, but they are very good at doing repetitive tasks. So, I want to start this day throwing some questions at you, so I don't have to talk, and I can breathe and relax. Let's take care of the extremes. Let's take care of, so what are our worst fears when it comes to artificial intelligence? Is this working? Not working? Yeah. So I want you to think about this and raise your hand and tell me. The good news is that the stakes are really low, like there is really no bad answer, there's just answers. So when you think about artificial intelligence, and it doesn't have to be applied to journalism, what are your worst fears? Go. Hands up, yes. So artificial intelligence will take over our jobs in the future. Great. Another fear, worst fear. Alex.
We'll control our conditions in ways that we don't want, decide that we should not use air conditioning because it's killing the climate, the planet, and so we all will bake.
Go ahead.
We all will bake.
Okay. Yes?
It'll be impossible to find out who's responsible for any decision.
Yes, absolutely. These systems will be making decisions for us, perhaps in an autonomous way, and it will be impossible to hold these systems accountable. Alex is a lawyer, so like exactly, that's like a big deal. Like who made that decision? And we are in a situation right now where there are stories that are being written automatically using AI by various media organizations. If there's an error in that story, who do we hold accountable? What editor, what reporter, who?
And in addition to that, there is no human factor in those decisions anymore.
There's no human factor, yes. Good. Well, lots of difficult issues we could be facing. Now, let's go to the other extreme. So what excites us most about artificial intelligence? What are our hopes when we think about this technology? Who wants to give the half-full version? Yes.
I believe there are so many tasks that we are bored while doing it, like transcription, for example, having a lot of information that should be dedicated or aggregated in a way in a very short time with a very good skill. Sometimes we cannot do it.
Yes, yes. Small, boring, repetitive tasks. What else, Malek?
Yeah, I think in the other extreme that we can make better decision for a lot of decision that we need to make with the help of this intelligence and artificial intelligence.
Great, great. One more. Yes, lady there.
بعتقد إنه نحن ممكن نتعلم من بعض المهارات بس نحن خايفين من إنه هم يستحوذوا على أكبر الوظائف في فرص محدودة للوظائف.
I don't have my translator. Can somebody who speaks Arabic can somebody like just quickly tell me?
Yeah, we can learn from each other, but we are a little bit afraid that they will seize all the high-level positions.
Okay. Thank you so much. Great. Yeah, no, I don't think I can handle like yet another piece of. I'm gonna leave this here. I'm gonna rely on my translator. Yes, we need the microphone here. Another hope for
I think one of the
intelligence.
most exciting stuff I am waiting for is that when we can link the artificial intelligence to the human brain through the Neuralink Elon Musk's promise.
So the computer can like read our thoughts.
Yeah. The idea is to feed the human brain with artificial intelligence and
An external hard disk.
an external chip.
Yeah, that seems pretty scary to me, but we can put it as a hope. Okay, sure. Okay, good. And then the final question is how artificial intelligence can help investigative journalists. This is the question that we most care about. So most of you, I'm sure, are investigative journalists. That's why we're at this conference. Yes. Do we have the...
So I think one of the most important things for investigative journalists in particular is archives or big documents, like thousands of documents. So in saving time and looking through those documents and archives, this is one of the most important things that AI could help investigative journalists in,
Yes.
I think.
Tackle those impossible stories that we've all faced. Great. Any other way in which AI is going to help investigative journalists? Yes. Here.
I don't think it only concerns investigative journalists, but I discovered Trint, and
Oh,
it made
yeah.
a huge difference.
Can you tell people what Trint
Trint is an artificial intelligence program website, and it transcribes all the interviews. So after that, you can look for keywords instead of listening to the whole interview, and it makes you save hours.
Yeah, so a huge field of growth in artificial intelligence is speech recognition. And this technology, which is spreading through newsrooms as we speak, is allowing us, so basically if you have an hour-long interview, the computer takes about 20, 25 minutes to transcribe it, to understand everything that is going on and just transcribe it for you. And the accuracy is pretty high. Any other? Yes.
I think it is make analytic more easy and more easy for time and analytic for the get category. It is more easy for me.
Yes, helping us analyze huge amounts of data and get insights faster. Wonderful. So we're going to quickly get through some concepts so we get them out of the way. We're going to talk about some ways that artificial intelligence is changing different fields that are not journalism, and then we're going to focus on journalism, okay? So what is AI anyway? It's a computer system that is able to perform tasks that are normally require human intelligence. And how does the computer learn to think like a human? Well, the computer basically needs to learn from us. The computer is emulating the way that humans think, and the computer is learning something about the world that we, humans, are teaching the computer. So the computer is learning about money laundering, for example, from an expert, from an investigative reporter, from an investigator, from a prosecutor. We are teaching the computer in a very methodic way what we know about the world, so then the computer can kind of like take over, quote unquote, some of those repetitive tasks that we talked about before and free us to do more meaningful work. That is the promise of artificial intelligence. So what is an algorithm? It's another concept that is thrown out a lot these days. So an algorithm, the best way to remember is a step. It's like a recipe. It's a step-by-step process, right? Like in a recipe, we first do this, and then we do this, and we have this other variable and this other variable. If these conditions are met, then this is going to happen. So when we talk about algorithms, let's think about them as recipes, as a step-by-step rules that help the computer organize the information we have given it, and then give us an output. We gave you all this information about what constitutes money laundering, and we told you these rules that should apply. And then the computer is going to go and look for, in that data, for markers that coincide with those parameters that we have taught it. So, yay. There are some algorithms that are, obviously, there are many, many types of algorithms. These are some of the ones that we might encounter more frequently when we are dealing with huge amounts of data, which is probably the situation in which many of us are going to find ourselves. So classification, clustering, and regression. And very, very simply put, classification is when we know already beforehand the categories that we want to teach the computer to recognize. So there's a very simple example here, bagel or donut. So literally, it's like with a child. We give the computer, to teach a computer to, by itself, be able to recognize the difference between a bagel and a donut. What we do is we feed the computer a lot of images of a bagel and a donut, and there are many similarities between those, right? So it's easy for the computer to get confused. We give them all the different options for what, for what it could constitute one or the other, until by repetition, like our children, it learns to make that judgment, to make that conclusion automatically and without our help. We can also do clustering. It's another type of algorithm. And in clustering, we don't need to tell the computer, or we don't usually tell the computer a predetermined category. We don't tell the computer cat or dog, bagel or donut. But we give them some general maybe indicators and then let the algorithm loose to make associations. The computer can associate things, can look at a set of images and recognize similarities in that set, and then associate, cluster those things together. And that is very useful when we don't have time to go through the process of what is called labeling or tagging the data, telling the computer bagel, donut, bagel, donut. That takes a lot of human labor. So clustering is really helpful for us to just quickly see what the computer can cluster together. And we've done that at Icij with a few projects, and I'm going to show you later where the computer has helped us, has looked at a universe of completely all kinds of documents all over the place, and has been able to recognize and cluster. For example, we said, put all the loan agreements that we are interested in. Try to recognize them. We just gave the computer just a few examples, and then the computer went and clustered all the other loan agreements in that maze of millions of documents. And then finally, regression, which is quite common too, which is give the computer a lot of data, historical data usually, and the computer, based on that historic data, makes a prediction about the future, about what can happen. These are, and there has been some very difficult issues that have come up with this kind of approach. We'll look at an example next. I'm trying to find what is the sweet spot. Where should I stand to get to? Yeah, okay. So let's look at different fields and understand how artificial intelligence is changing other fields and what we can learn from that. artificial intelligence, one of the fields that artificial intelligence is really transforming is agriculture. And I thought this example, Plant Village, was super, super cool. So what Plant Village does, it works with small farmers around the world. And most farming around the world it happens not in huge corporate, farming facilities, but is conducted, by very, very small farmers. And what happens with these farmers is that there's a big gap of knowledge between, what their big corporate competitors can do and know and what they can do. So this technology, it requires a very, simple phone. It doesn't have to be like an iPhone 10 or anything. It can be, but it requires, farmers need to have phones. And apparently this program distributes like old phones to farmers. They don't need an internet connection. They just need to download the app. And for that, yes, they need the internet connection. But then when they use it with the crops, they don't. And basically what they do is they just wave the phone over the crops. And by looking at the crops, the algorithm is able to identify what is wrong with that plant or what is right with that plant. It helps them diagnose the possible pest or disease that is affecting the crops. And not only that, it gives them alternative solutions, possible things that they can do to work, to improve the crops. So it's fed, like this app has like tons and tons and tons of data and a huge library that has, that helps, helps the algorithm make that decision and diagnose for the farmers. So here's an example of low-key technology applied to something very specific and to help close a gap with an underserved population. Medicine is one of the areas of biggest transformation through artificial intelligence. And I picked, there are many, many examples. I picked one that was published recently by Stanford University and has to do with something that the ladies in the room know very well, which is mammograms, and it's a really important thing in our lives. And one of the issues with mammograms is that oftentimes, because doctors are conservative and we don't want to miss any cancers, there's a lot of what is called false positives, right? So lots of times when women say, it looks like it might be a bad tumor. And then you go through this process and this anxiety. And in most cases, it's not, right? But the reality today is that radiologists give us a lot of false positives when it comes to diagnosing potential breast cancer. So what they did with these artificial intelligence systems, so the goal was to decrease that number of false alarms. So they fed this algorithm tons of data from different, I think 5 or 10 different hospitals. Data, historic data, studies, tests. It gave them a lot of data. And then it compared, the performance of the radiologists with the AI system. So the radiologists missed 174 cases of cancer, of thousands. There was like 174. The computer missed 175, so it missed one more. Not a huge difference. But look at the false positives. So when it was about recognizing and what was not cancer, the doctors gave false alarms, false positives in more than 12,000 cases. The algorithm that had learned from all this data and from all this knowledge that the doctors had been feeding these computers over the years was able to give false alarms in 9,000 cases. So it performed better in that respect than the doctors. So again, how algorithms can, in the future, in the present, right now, help make decisions that can save lives and that also can save us from going through bad moments and save us from anxiety. Another example. Wow, I would love for it to be easier. Okay, this is one of my favorite examples. It's happening in Brazil, and this is getting closer to journalism. Operación Serenata de Amor, which is like love song. So Operación Serenata de Amor is an AI that is helping Brazilian citizens know, almost like in real time, how their Congress people are using their expenses. So there's money that they can use for expenses, and these Brazilian Congress people file for reimbursement all the time. And there are like about the Congress receives about 1,500 requests for reimbursement every single day. So there's millions and millions of data points that apparently they are open, they are available online. And so what this Operación Serenata de Amor, which is like journalists and researchers and activists, what they did is they created, you saw her before in one of my slides, they created Rosie, and Rosie analyzes the expenses in real time. It basically goes looking for outliers. It looks at all these millions and millions of information about the expenses, and it highlights the ones that look suspicious. So by doing that, for example, it identified a congressman who had paid for like about 30 meals in 2 days or in 1 day, or another one who was filling his gas tank 50 times in a span of 4 days. So it's looking for those outliers that are usually at the heart of stories we do. And then at the beginning, they were sending the outliers the results to Congress. And of course, nothing was happening. So the computer the system was showing, let's say the Inspector General at Congress what was going on, and nothing was happening. So then they decided to make it public. And they created @Rosie da Serenata. You can follow her on Twitter. And what Rosie does is it tells the public, can you help me? Today I found this in the expenses of congressmen. What do you think? And then the public, journalists, researchers go and do their research, ask the questions, and confirm whether that is something that really merits holding that person accountable or not. And that "can you help me" makes a really important point. Artificial intelligence gives us leads. It doesn't give us the answer, right? And that is super important to understand. None of what we have discussed so far works on its own. It's just leads that can help then the humans make better decisions. It just kind of gives us these atajos is the word in Espanol, is these shortcuts. Yeah, these shortcuts to information that we really need to make important decisions. This is a super cool project. So we've seen how the computer is making decisions based on images, like in the mammography case. We saw how the computer is making decisions based on data, like in the congressman case. And now there's another kind of signal that the algorithm can pick up. And in this case is noise. Noise is information. And so in the Amazon, what is happening is they have come up with this really cool system that uses solar-powered cell phones on trees, and those solar-powered cell phones are picking up the noises that are typically associated with logging, with illegal logging. So as it says here, it's picking up the chainsaws and the logging trucks and all that other audio that can tell park rangers that there might be illegal logging happening in one of those locations. I thought that this was brilliant. I don't know about you. Any of these can be used for bad things, of course. And we're going to see more cases now that are going to make you even more nervous. All of these can be used for good, or it can be used for bad. And we're going to see some examples now. But I thought that this was brilliant. So again, interesting also to think about how the system can learn from all these data points, and the data points don't have to be text. They can be text, they can be video, they can be images, they can be audio. And talking about the bad side, algorithms, and we are seeing that a lot these days, can also be used in really, really bad ways that can help perpetuate divisions, that can help perpetuate discrimination, like in the case that we are seeing here, where police departments across the US had been notorious for racial profiling, for illegally and disproportionately targeting minorities. And then they were, after they acknowledged that they had done that, they used that same data to create these algorithms that would give them information about where they need to be policing, where they need to increase surveillance, or who, or where, where arrests were guaranteed. And that's why, and in some cases, they made up the data too. In some cases, they were like manually, manipulating the data. And then they used that same data to create these algorithms that would help inform their policies. We put garbage in, we get garbage out, right? And that is, yes, that is the big problem with all the systems. The same happened at Amazon when it famously had to completely scratch this program that was supposedly going to help it recruit and make better decisions. Millions of resumes were flowing to Amazon. People want to work there. Well, the algorithm was using data to make decisions about what constitute a desirable future Amazon employee. Guess how the decision was being made by the algorithm, based on what a good employee for Amazon had been until that point. And the reality is that in a lot of the technical jobs, those employees were overwhelmingly white males. And so, no doubt, no surprise, the algorithm was excluding a lot of women that were applying through this system. And this is big tech, right? Okay, so coming back to journalism. At Icij, we work with a network of reporters around the world. It's the best. We do the best we have, our biggest asset. We work together on investigations that are usually based on terabytes of data, lots of messy data all over the place, often public, sometimes confidential. And you remember Panama Papers. These investigations have consequences, political consequences, economic consequences, social consequences. People lose their jobs. One prime minister lose their job, another prime minister lost his job. Panama Papers at the time made a ton of people uncomfortable around the world. Sorry for the bad words. It was hailed as a triumph of technology at the service of journalism. And it really was. It was using open source technology in smart ways to allow journalists to it took us a year, to mine this information in a way that made sense. To get, from the mess, from the chaos of more than 11 million records, to the story that was going to change the world, that was going to bring down a government, that was going to expose inequality. But even as it was hailed as this huge triumph, I can tell you that many times we felt like this, or throughout the process. We were using technology in great ways that was helping us, but we were also, a lot of the work that was being done was very manual, right? We had the platforms, we had some filters, we had things that in 2016, 2015 were great and advanced, But at the end of the day, journalists, and some of them are in this room, are still typing name by name of the people that they were searching in these databases, right? It was a lot of typing of individual names. And that is only worse now, because now we have not 11 million documents, but more than 40 million documents in our central repositories. So it's urgent for us to find better, smarter ways to mine this information. And one of those ways is using the power of machine learning, which is a subset of artificial intelligence, to help us decrease the time and the human labor, especially at the onset, at the beginning of the investigation. So then we can devote more time, as we said before, to contextualize and to tell stories. So this is the way that we understand AI in investigative journalism, is that it helps us organize, make sense, and untangle this information, this messy information that we deal with. Our goal is to augment human-computer cooperation so we can enhance the story discovery and the reporting process. So people ask me sometimes, so how do you recognize when you need to use machine learning, artificial intelligence, as opposed to less fancy solutions? And I say, well, it's when we realize we need machine learning when we feel like this. When we feel like we are looking at so many images, so many documents, when you have that feeling, how am I ever going to go through all of this? How am I ever going to sort out all this data, look at all this video, listen to all this audio? So anytime we have that feeling and we have those eyes, then that's probably a moment where maybe machine learning can help us along the way. And usually the three markers are the vastness of the data. If we have 1,000 documents, no matter how you look about it, it's probably not going to be about machine learning. It's probably going to be about something else. But if you have 100,000, if you have 1 million documents, vastness of data is a really important marker. Variety of formats and lack of consistency. Because there are filters and there are search engines and there are ways, if you have something that is incredibly consistent, well, then you just use those to get your consistent data in, organized. But we are talking here about lack of consistency, about things that look one way and another way and 100 different ways. But you need them all, right? They are all pointing in the same direction, but they don't have the same look. And that's where artificial intelligence can really help us, because the computer, as we said before, learn about all these different ways in which something can be true, all the different ways in which a bagel or a donut can look, and then get really, really good at recognizing them on its own without our help. So we're going to go through like 2 or 3 questions that we can ask ourselves as journalists, and we can see how machine learning has helped Icij, but also other news organizations sort those questions. So one of the most basic questions that we ask ourselves is like, if we have a Panama Papers type situation, how can we quickly get the most valuable documents and separate them from the rest, right? So separate the wheat from the, what is the? Yeah, there you go. So how do we do that? And so we had a recent example that our colleague Will here led with Mauritius leaks, which was a leak that showed the role of this island country in being a tax haven for Africa. And in this leak, there were more than, 200,000 documents, Will? But there were some financial statements that were the most valuable documents among the 200,000. So we team up with Quartz. Quartz is a media company in the US, and they have an artificial intelligence lab. And Quartz helped us come up with an algorithm that learned what those financial statements that were so valuable to these journalists looked like. So we fed the algorithm about 14, I think, different cases of what these documents could look like. And then the system was able to, learn and then create predictions and give us lists of documents. And you can see there the score that it assigned of how likely was it that that particular document was true. That means that it fit that pattern of that financial statement that we were so interested in. And then from there, the reporters, so instead of now looking and individually and writing a name in a search engine, the journalists now had a list from which they could pick. And of course, there's still manual work, but it's going from 200,000 to a much smaller universe. And in the end, the computer was able to identify about 300 financial statements that led to stories, including stories like this. So how do we go from the vastness of data, everything looks inconsistent and difficult and we don't have time, to seize in on 300 documents that are the most valuable, that then can take us to the story that the public cares about. Yes? The name, so this was just there were several things that we used. There was one of the things that we used for this was called doc2vec. And doc2vec, basically what it did at the beginning was to map, it was kind of like a map of all the documents in our data. Remember when we talked at the beginning about, sorry? It was like so what the algorithm did is remember at the beginning when I talked about clustering, and we explained that clustering was like the computer finding associations on its own. So the first step for this was for the computer to just learn a little bit what is it that we were looking for, and making, at first it was images, what they look at, images of what they looked like based on their headers, based on, and then later based on the keywords. So, but at first it was just the images, what these documents look like, and they cluster them based on that. And then we use the keywords, very, very good. We use keywords to be able to refine even more.
How can to connect between the picture and keywords?
First, the algorithm just look at the pictures. It was a very, very preliminary thing. Okay, let me see the documents that look the same. The emails were all in one space. These other documents that were loan agreements were all in one space. So the computer was just associating and creating these groups. And then after that, we did the keywords. The keywords that were the ones that were found in these specific financial statements that we were looking for. So it was kind of like a
looking for? I want this point. What looking for in the picture?
Oh, what we were looking in the pictures, as I said before, we were looking for different headers. For example, the letterhead for certain accounting firms that were responsible for many of these financial statements.
Okay.
We were looking for, numbers, perhaps, charts, So it was kind of like a visual clustering. And then the more in-depth level of the keywords that were crucial in these documents. Now, a second question. Can machine learning light up a pattern that is hidden in millions of documents? So there's a wonderful example from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which is a newspaper in the United States. And what the Atlanta Journal-Constitution did was the following. The reporters found out that there were doctors that had sexually abused their patients. And these doctors were given a slap in the hand. Nothing was really happening to them. They were able to go on and continue doing medicine. So they started wondering, how can we systematically expose this? First, they thought it was just their own state, and then they realized that it was all the states in the United States that this was happening. So some of the agencies that were in charge of these programs gave them the data, and many didn't, and so they had to end up scraping all this data from different, regulatory websites. So they end up with 100,000 cases of misconduct. But guess what? These was cases of misconduct by doctors. These were not all cases of sexual abuse by doctors. So then they use an algorithm to try to zero in the cases, the most useful, the most important, the cases that they care about, which were the sexual misconduct. And so just like we said before, similarly, they did language recognition. They taught the computer what were the most common terms that appeared in the documents that were specific about sexual abuse, as opposed to all other forms of wrongdoing that these doctors were involved in. And they went from 100,000 cases to 6,000 cases. And because in those cases, the computer said, we have a certainty, I have a certainty, said the algorithm, of like 85% or more, that this constitutes the kind of abuse that you're looking for. What do you then do with the 6,000 cases?
It is hidden, the case or the witness. How can to find this?
When we said hidden, that's why we had like the quotes. It means hidden because it's so vast. It's not that it's hidden. The documents were there. They were saying that these people had abused sexually their patients. What happened is that as humans, we don't have time to go through one by one 100,000 documents. So what these reporters did is like they got really good understanding. They had examples of what the sexual abuse once looked like. And so they taught the computer, these are all the terms that you should be paying attention to help us find more of this. Help us find more of this. And the computer helped them find 6,000 cases. Of those 6,000 cases, guess what the reporters had to do? They had to check them by hand, one by one. So human-computer cooperation, the artificial intelligence doesn't solve all the problem, doesn't give us the solution. We don't rush to press. It gives us leads. Yes?
I have a question. I'm confused because what you're describing is just filtration. You're talking about keyword filtration. It's not really artificial intelligence. Like the programs are not doing natural language processing where they understand the documents and pointing out. You're feeding them exactly the keywords and they're just filtering the documents.
No. We actually are doing natural language processing. We are giving them like vast lists of terms that are found, and the computer is making the associations and finding across the board, not just one term at a time. Okay, now I want to search for sex, and you get all the documents. Now I want to search, no. You're giving the computer a whole dictionary of terms, and the computer is going through the vastness of data and giving you potential leads that fit that pattern. But that's not something that you do in a search engine with a traditional filter like we were doing in Panama Papers. This is something that we do through the algorithm. So let me keep going because we have a little bit more and then we'll do more questions in a little bit. So one by one, and they finally were able to confirm 3,100 cases of sexual abuse by doctors nationwide in the US. We did a similar process in our investigation at Icij called Implant Files, which was an investigation into the under-regulation of medical devices, how stents and hip implants and all kinds of devices have harmed people all over the world. And we got a tip from a source that told us that manufacturers were reporting cases to the regulators in the US where a device had killed a person, but instead of reporting it as a death, they were reporting it as something else, as an injury or a malfunction of a device, right? It was misclassification that, at best you can say it was a human error if we want to be really nice, and at worst we could say that maybe it was a manipulation and trying to basically not be held accountable for, not call attention to their devices by the regulators. So, for example, in this case, what they had said, and what they were doing is they were using misleading language. So they were saying it was reported that the patient expired. So instead of saying the patient died. And then in the column where they needed to say if this was a malfunction, an injury, or a death, they were saying, guess what? It was a malfunction. But in reality, the patient had died. And so how do we go about, in a database that have 5 million records, similar to the doctor abuse and other cases we've talked about, how do we find the needle in the haystack? How do we find those cases to prove that this tip that the sources had given us is true? So what we did, again, we created a dictionary. We taught the computer what these real death reports look like. We started with 121 terms that the sources gave us. Sources who know these documents inside out gave us a lot of terms. And then adding a little bit of programming, we were able to expand that to like 3,400 different terms that identify death, that show us death in these documents. And then the next step, oh guys, this thing. Okay. We encountered, so we ran the algorithm. We had to be very careful, and again, human-computer cooperation, because we encountered false positives. False positives, for example, the patient had a dead battery. Is that a case of a dead patient? No, it's not. Or he noted that his father passed away. So the algorithm was showing us some of the words that we had taught it to recognize, but the algorithm doesn't understand the context. That's what the journalists bring to the picture. So that's why it was so important that throughout this process, as we were searching for these cases, the journalists were checking again and making sure that we were not skewing and that we were not going with those false positives. In the end, we were able to identify more than 2,000 cases in which manufacturers had reported something to regulators, had reported a death instead as an injury or as a malfunction. So more than 2,000 cases in which the death of a person caused by a medical device had been misreported to authorities. We are, okay. And then the final one, have just a couple more examples. Can machine learning help us fight data suppression? This is a really good example from BuzzFeed, focusing on spy planes. It turns out that in the US, apparently the sky is buzzing with spy planes that are collecting all kinds of information and conducting all kinds of operations. Sometimes they are testing technology that they are going to be exporting overseas. Sometimes they are like tracking drug dealers. Sometimes they are listening in on people's communications, for example, along the US-Mexico border. And so these reporters wanted to find out more about these planes, but guess what? Obviously, very, very little information was available. There was some information available, though, in court cases and in other places there was information about the patterns of some of the spy planes, about their altitude at which they fly, and the patterns that they draw in the sky when so they fed that information again to the computer, so the computer would learn to identify these patterns of the spy planes. And it also fed the computer a lot of information about other planes that were not spy planes, right? Bagels and donuts. And so in the end, and it turned out that the spy planes were doing a lot of circular patterns, right? Of course, because they are patrolling a particular area, they are collecting information. So one of the patterns was the circular patterns in place. This is what they found along the US-Mexico border. And they were able to identify the scores of spy planes that had not been known until that time and show the kind of activities that they were performing. Can machine learning help us research environmental disasters? I love this example. It's from Ukraine, from an agency called Texti. And what Texti did is they used satellite imagery, another wonderful field for research and for use of machine learning. Amber was not a desirable, or like a valuable thing in Ukraine for a long time, until the Chinese discovered it and started to mine it illegally in great quantities. And then it became really valuable. And then the land started to really suffer and be greatly damaged by this illegal mining. So what Texti did was to teach the computer to recognize the shape of the lands in these satellite imageries. It taught the computer to recognize what land looked like once it had been illegally mined for amber. And they let this algorithm loose and were able to map and all the different areas in which illegal mining for amber was going on in their country. Again, one of those impossible stories that would not have happened had it not been for the help of this advanced technology, of this algorithm, to help them deal with the vastness of the data and zero in on what was important. So to finish, what we've learned so far from doing experimentation with machine learning at Icij, what our colleagues had learned in other organizations, is not magic, right? It's a process, and it's a laborious process. Human cooperation is absolutely essential. These are not computers that are going to go and do anything on their own, but that we need to be involved from day one. We are aware of both false positives and false negatives. A lot of people ask me, how do you know that, for example, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution found all the cases that involve sexual abuse? Can they say for sure that those 3,100 are all the cases? And the answer is no. They don't know. They went from knowing very few in their state to learning about 3,100 in the nation. But there are limitations, right? You are looking at a universe and you are trying your very best to gather and extract information that otherwise would have stayed hidden. But often you can't say that those are absolutely the only cases that were that existed. That's why it's important to know how we are using this technology and what the end product might be. If we are using it only to get leads and then do all of the reporting, then there's one kind of fact check that is going to be involved. If we are using it to publish a particular number, like in the case of the deaths in the Implant files investigation, we wanted to come up with a number. We wanted to say that there were at least 2,100, we wanted, or X number of misclassified deaths. And so if we are going to publish a number, then we need to fact check absolutely case by case. So if somebody comes asking us, okay, show me all these deaths, we can show exactly each one of them and be very comfortable with that information. It's a good idea to ask an external partner to check our work, especially if we, as we are like at Icij experimenting with this new technology. Universities are great partners. There's a lot of computer scientists at universities that want to help journalists. That's what we have found in the US. And I'm sure that happens around the world as well. So check out about what kind of help you can get there. Tell the story of the machine learning process. I think that we need a lot more cases of successful use of machine learning in journalism. So if you know of cases, or if you're experimenting in your own newsroom, don't forget to write about it and to tell us how you're doing it. And a lot of these models that we are using to find out the most valuable documents or the pattern are recyclable. You do it one time and then you can use it for other similar cases. So there's a lot that can be built on the knowledge that is already out there, and that's why all these cases that I have mentioned today, you can find the code in GitHub, and you can see how maybe it can be tweaked or applied to your own stories. It's always about interdisciplinary and collaborative work. These are some of the kind of people that intervene in any particular one of these experiments at Icij and at other organizations. This is not the work of some geek in a corner that is going to solve all of our problems. In anything we do related to machine learning, it has to involve everyone from the top down. These are like decisions that have big implications, and it has to be really a collaborative process. So we can continue to have the kind of impact and hold the powerful accountable. Okay. Wait. We're gonna finish on that one, not on the one with the bad words. Thank you, guys. Women. Okay, can we start with a question and then I'll come to you.
First of all, thank you so much. This was very informative. There seems to be a fine line between AI used as means of calculations or mathematics and human judgment or awareness or consciousness. And I feel that this is when the human part kind of plays in a role. So if we believe that human conscious or awareness is built upon several experiences, and those experiences are calculated and can be fed in a machine, can we reach to the point where this AI can make human judgments editorially or what have you, well, based on these experiences, if they're fed properly?
I think that we have seen in these cases that the computer is making judgments, is making predictions, is showing us things that are, and what we've experienced is that sometimes with great accuracy. We've done, experiments where like the machine has gotten it right, like in more than 96% of the cases. So this is already happening. The thing is that it's not perfect. It's not perfect, and as journalists, we need to be super aware of the need to fact check and to be part of the process throughout. Because it's not that you fed the computer the knowledge once and then you walk away, then it goes, does its own black box, and then gives you a result that you publish. It's a whole process of cooperation throughout the machine learning process, in which the humans constantly are revising what the computer is showing, are tweaking and saying, okay, you got it wrong here, you got it wrong here, you got it wrong here, so the computer can get better at this. Yes. I can give it to you.
Do you think Icij can build like an Alexa or Siri to help journalists mine into these millions of data you have?
Well, I don't think so.
Based on AI, I mean.
I don't know if like an Alexa or a Siri, maybe in the future, but we are trying to definitely have been experimenting with this technology since 2017. And the way we've done is it in partnerships with those who have the resources and can help us. So I mentioned Quartz. We also did an experiment with the Stanford University. We're going to be publishing about that on Monday. So we are reaching out through partnerships and collaboration to those who have the knowledge and the resources and can help us get better at this. Because yes, we need to improve the way that we mine data, and we need to make it faster and better. That is absolutely for sure. And we want to lead in that space. We want to help investigative journalists all over the world benefit from this technology. So absolutely, I think we have a role to play, and we are trying to really lead in the space as much as we can and share the knowledge that we are getting. In Arabic? Yes. Well, when we teach the computer, for example, to recognize the most valuable documents, one of the things that we do is like pay attention to language, because these leaks or these hubs of information, they're never all in English, for example, right? So when you are training the model, you are also training the model in all the relevant different languages. And when it comes to Panama Papers, if we were training the model to recognize these keywords and we only use English, then we would miss half of the documents, because half of the documents in the Panama Papers, as those of you who work in that case know, are in Spanish. So remember, put garbage in, gets garbage out. So much of it is like, what judgment are we making as journalists? What data are we feeding these algorithms as journalists? And the output is only going to reflect that process. So if we had bad data, or if we had a bad process, or if we have biases, and a bias can be assuming that we're dealing with English, right? Then we're going to get a biased, limited, and faulty result. Okay, now she has.
It is different. I have a question. Data journalist and investigation journalism, or you can't use both. And another question, it is have mistake percent in the intelligent, or it is correct, fact correct?
So if I understand the question, the first one you said, if it is the same, like how do I differentiate data journalism and investigative journalism? I basically consider data, kind of like data journalism is part of investigative journalism. Like so much of what we do is data driven. We rely on data, we rely on documents. So I try to not kind of like worry too much about separating things. I try to bring them together. And so for us, as we do investigations, we do a lot of data journalism, data analysis, data mining that help us get better results. And then the second question was about the accuracy. The accuracy, it depends on many, many factors. And it's never perfect, and it's never, as I show you in the examples, it's never super accurate. But it can get better.
They have percentage mistake.
How what? How percentage?
They have mistake.
So then, what you do is you look at the results, and depending on, let's say, like the computer told you, hey, here is a financial statement that it might be helpful for your Mauritius leak investigation.
How can to find the fact
then
check?
you look at the document and you are like, oh, I wonder if the computer is right that this is in fact a financial statement. And if I start looking at it and I'm like, gee, this looks like a lot like a court document, not a financial statement. Looks like the computer got it wrong here. So it's basically after you get the information from the algorithm, then you just do not regular reporting, regular fact checking, and just be a journalist. And don't trust anything and anybody. If the old rule applies, your mom tells you she loves you, fact check it out.
Okay. There have any application for our website for fact checking news?
I don't know websites for fact checking, but maybe others know.
Thank you very much for this very informative session and the great information. I think one of the important things that are also worth talking about is the process before AI and before machine learning, which is the process in place for organizing the data and organizing the system. So, for example, what you talked about in Argentina, I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the project.
In Brazil, the Congress?
Brazil, yeah. That is very interesting, but I think unless there is a system before which urges parliament members and ministers to submit their receipts and invoices and so on, machine learning wouldn't have been a great solution.
Absolutely.
So we cannot, for example, just bring the system to this part of the world and ask it to fact check or learn about the expenses and so on, and voila, we have
if you don't have information,
exactly.
if there's no transparency around Congress expenses, in a country the way that is in Brazil. And certainly in my country, for Argentina, we don't have that system.
Exactly.
Then of course the computer has nothing to learn from.
Yeah. So I think if we can just elaborate on your advice or tips for the newsrooms who want to, especially in this part of the world, who want to use machine learning and AI in their system, to what they should do or what they should have in place before they start employing these systems.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think it's really important to have a data and a document state of mind throughout the newsroom. And what I see a lot happening around the world and in different newsrooms is that we are all collecting a lot of information. And then we are sitting on that information. You go to a newsroom and that newsroom, like, there's a wealth of documents and data in every single reporter's desktop and computer, and it's all spread out in those desktops and computer and in piles of papers. And imagine the wealth imagine what you could do with that is instead of sitting on the desks, instead of like languishing in their computers, that if there was somebody in that newsroom that is collecting that information, that comes up with a way to systematically scan and standardize and clean the data that is collected by the journalists. We say in journalism, quoting one of our members, that we believe in zero waste journalism. And zero waste journalism is trying to find ways in our newsroom to collect systematically the documents, the data that we all have, feeding it to an open source platform, nothing fancy, nothing expensive, but just have it all together in a way that then you can search it, in a way that it becomes something, instead of all these loose pieces of papers all over the place. You have them in a platform. That's what we do at Icij. And we started like everybody else. At the beginning, we had all these different things, in different platforms. It didn't make any sense. And now we have started from a few years ago to bring it all together in one platform, in one place, and to standardize things, and to kind of prepare this information for these more advanced techniques that we are learning, so we can get, again, to the story faster. That's the goal. The goal is like, how do we get to the story faster? How do we get better stories? How do we improve our timing? Because, 2016, when I think about Panama Papers, it was a completely different world, guys. Like the news cycle then, we were in the news for like 3 months with Panama Papers. Nothing else was going on for 3 months. Can you imagine today? Like if you would be able to have a story, as good as a story can be, what story can dominate news for 3 months today? No story. I just can't imagine. So it's a different moment, and journalists have less time and less resources. So we at Icij take it as our responsibility as an organization that sits kind of like in the midst of a constellation of journalists and media partners to try to improve the ways in which we can get to that story. Zero waste journalism, zero waste of documents, data, and zero waste of time as well. Yes. Can I have him ask, and then you?
Sorry, thank you, Marina. My question is it's obviously a fast-moving area and really, really interesting. And you mentioned that a lot of code was published, and you mentioned a couple of people you partnered with. I just wonder if you have some suggestions for where you would follow the debate here. What are the good things if I wanted to sort of carry on looking into the subject and keep track of it? Where is the discussion happening, and what are good things to read and to sort of learn more?
That's a great question. So a few things. First of all, it's a very new and fast-moving, as you say, field for journalism. So a lot of information is right now quite dispersed, to be honest. We need to create ways to bring the debate together. But there are a few things that are happening that you should pay attention to. So the London School of Economics and Google, they just released a report about the state of AI in the newsroom. So if you can search it and read it, it's succinct, and it basically is a survey, and it shows what journalists around the world have said about what we said at the beginning, their worst fears, their biggest hopes, and how how machine learning is actually helping them right now, this minute, and what it's not doing for them too. So check that out. Another tip, the Knight Center for Journalism in the Americas, they are about to start a webinar, like what is it called, like one of those MOOC classes, and it's all going to be about investigative journalism and machine learning, and it's going to be taught by John Keefe. John Keefe is the journalist that leads the AI lab at Quartz, and we partner with them on the Mauritius Leaks investigation. I believe it's fairly affordable. The course is several weeks. You can do it in your own time from your own computer. Check it out and consider doing it. The Finnish government, of all institutions and people, and they came up with a really good AI training, virtual training. So look at Finland AI literacy. It's very methodic, it's very good if you just want to get immersed in the topic and kind of learn the basics and start experimenting. What else? What other spaces to look for? Those are the ones that come to mind, but if I can think of others, I'll let you know.
Thank you, Marina. Do you think that ICIJ will think again to benefit from Panama Papers, to review them by these new tools? I mean that maybe in that time, a lot of documents, it's not worthy to dig on it, but maybe it's easier nowadays to review them to benefit with the new stories.
Yes, so we are all the time thinking about most of the experiments we've done so far have been applied to the investigation that we have at hand at that moment, rather than going back in history. But absolutely, as we, for example, the algorithm that detects the most interesting financial documents can very easily be run against Panama Papers if we wanted to. On Paradise Papers, we did it actually on Paradise Papers, and it helped us identify loan agreements, which were the key, most valuable documents for a particular story we were doing on Glencore. So we will get there. Right now, it's usually the project of the moment that is our biggest preoccupation, because we are trying to help the journalists do better in that particular project. But yes, so my dream and part of the vision of what we have for this, remember how I told you that our documents are all, you know, that in this platform where our journalists can log in from over different parts of the world and search. What I would like is to feed these machine learning processes to that platform. So when journalists, for example, can go to a tab, and they can already do that, and click, okay, give me the politically exposed people, all the documents that deal with that. And then not only that, which they can already do that, so we do the machine learning on a separate platform, and then we create those lists in our big platform. But I want the journalists to be able to give feedback to the algorithm in real time. So when they go through the PEP, if there's an error, if somebody is like, one of those cases, a false positive, that it can, in real time, give feedback to the system, which is wonderful, because that's when these processes really thrive, when they can get crowdsourcing input. And what better crowdsource than our own journalists with their deep expertise? So if we can leverage the documents and data that we have, the processes, the experiments we are developing with machine learning, with the crowdsourcing knowledge of our specialized journalists, and bringing it all together in a systemic way. We're not there yet, but that's the vision, that our document platforms can be fully powered by machine learning, and that the journalists are thus giving us that human, real-life feedback all the time. Yes. We're totally going over time, but since nobody's coming to tell me anything, like, you feel free to leave. Like, I don't mean to hold you.
I just had a very practical question. I've had some discussions with AI companies in the UK about trying to help us, but I just wondered about cost. Have you, we're always looking to get people to collaborate, do it for free, help us with goodwill. I just wondered how expensive it is to get in that AI expertise.
It is expensive, and that's why I think the way to go and the way we've gone about it is through partnerships. What is expensive? The machine learning expertise is expensive because today somebody who graduates from, let's say, Berkeley or Stanford or Yale with that kind of knowledge, the entry-level job, they get paid probably $150,000. That's a kid, that's a 21-year-old kid with AI knowledge, entry-level at Google or anywhere else. And so how can we compete? How can we try to hire somebody like that for our newsrooms? So what we're trying to do is to circumvent that reality and work with universities, because master students and PhD students, what is it that they are missing? Well, they call it the real world problem. They are missing the data, they are missing the problem that will inspire them to hack it and to do all these things that they know how to do. What do we bring as journalists to them? We bring the real world problem. We bring the Congress expenses. We bring the Panama Papers, or we bring the Implant files. They love it. And another thing, a lot of them are worried about the state of democracy, and a lot of them are also feeling guilty about how much money they're making in big tech, or will make, starting in like 6 months. And so they're really willing to devote some time to do some pro bono work and to help journalists. So I would say the first thing I would do if I were you is find trusted professors and research scientists at your local university, see who is doing machine learning, can you trust them? Make sure they're not working for the CIA or have awful connections to other agencies. And if they are doing AI for good, if they're doing AI for medicine and for other areas, see how what they are doing can help you, and how what your real world problem can help them understand, improve their work.
Thank you very much. The biggest AI experts in the world today are probably big tech companies like Google, Facebook, or Amazon. Are you considering a partnership with those companies?
So Icij until now has never, that I know. We have our lawyer here, maybe he can remind us, but I don't think we've ever partnered with Google, and we've never received, or of these tech companies, or received money from them. And that's not to say that we will absolutely never do it, but we are trying to keep it a little separate and independent. And the reason is very simple. Often these companies are the subject of our investigations. So think about Paradise Papers. One of the main stories was Apple. So I'm really glad that we were not getting money from Apple or using their technology. That's the other thing. So Google has amazing technology. You're going to go to a presentation tomorrow from Google about AI, and they are going to tell you about all these tools that they make available to journalists and to the public to start experimenting with artificial intelligence. And I would say, absolutely go to the meeting, to the session, absolutely try those tools. Just be very careful what data you are going to be feeding that tool, because that is an online tool that is powered by Google, and you are virtually giving away your data to Google to be able to take advantage of their tool. And so if you're using public data from the US Federal Drug Administration, like we did in Implant files, it might be perfectly fine to use the tool that Google provides. If you're doing Panama Papers or Paradise Papers or another super sensitive investigation, hey, no, don't use any of those tools. So it's basically making a judgment. It's not either or. It's like, when can you use it? When can you take advantage of what these super powerful companies are putting out there? And it makes sense, and it's not going to imperil your investigation. Endanger. Okay. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for coming here and for your great questions.